Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure and honor to speak to you today on your beautiful and interesting conference. Unfortunately, I cannot be with you in person for several reasons. Please accept my apologies for that, but I hope you will enjoy my keynote lecture nevertheless. Okay, let's go. It's called, as you can see, Circulation and Scarcity on Non-Fungible Tokens. The question of ownership is complicated by modern media, since it seems to be a constitutive property of media to enhance reproducibility and circulation. Since Walter Benjamin's famous essay, Das Kunstwerk im Zeitalter seiner technischen Reproduzierbarkeit, the work of art in the age of its technical reproducibility, a common thesis of media theory has been that with the newer, first analog, then digital media, the circulation of science becomes faster and more immaterial. From a photographic plate, for example, one can make any number of prints. To ask for the authentic print makes no sense. But as soon as the criterion of authenticity ceases to be applied to artistic production, the whole social function of art is revolutionized, writes Walter Benjamin. Even without explicit reference to Benjamin, comparable theses have been formulated elsewhere. Günther Anders, for example, wrote about television reporting in his text, The World as Phantom and Matrix. Quote, "When the event in its reproduced form is socially more important than the original event, this original must be shaped with a view to being reproduced. In other words, the event becomes merely a master matrix or a mold for casting its own reproductions." It seems to be the signature of our epoch that the difference between original and reproduction is abolished. Anders, of course, refers less to photography and film than to television, and is clearly more culturally pessimistic about this change than Benjamin. A similar but more affirmative diagnosis can be found in the works of Jean Baudrillard from the mid-1970s on, to cut the story short. But this grand narrative of the end of the original has a number of problems. One is that the extension of reproducibility to ever wider subject areas necessarily entails the emergence of a technical non-reproducibility. The description of modernity as increased reproducibility is not wrong per se, but it is one-sided, especially if, as in Anders or Baudrillard, a collapse of the difference between original and copy is concluded. Objects that depend on them being originals, such as money banknotes, for example, secret documents and ID documents, passports and so on, must not be reproducible. Or more precisely, they are allowed only to be reproducible by certain institutions. One example, as the existence of millions of seemingly identical banknotes show, money can be reproduced in a way, but only by institutions close to the central bank. And in many currencies, each banknote has a unique number, is, so to speak, partially an original in its own way. There are several configurations of reproducibility and non-reproducibility in modernity. Money, as I said, ID documents, etc., have to be genuine. Thus, there is a history of unauthorized reproduction. And money counterfeiting, for example, has always been subject to heavy penalties. The distinction between original and copy is also maintained in the art system to this day. Even a work of appropriation art, let's say by Sherry Levine, is still an original. The difference also becomes relevant again in the field of digital media. Precisely because lossless reproduction could, in principle, retract the difference between original and copy, if one disregards the often given necessity of lossy data compression, it is all the more re-established. For in the digital world, the increased reproducibility finally seems to dissolve the commodity form, and thus the conditions of the possibility of economy, capitalist economy, in the first place. A digital good, a piece of software, a film, a piece of music, can be reproduced in principle as often as desired. Especially when this is done not by its producers, but by its users, its commercial value suffers massively. But the problem is even more fundamental. If a company gives away, sells, a piece of software for money, it keeps a copy. Unlike if a baker sells you a bread roll. You got the bread roll and he's got the money, but hasn't got the bread roll any longer. That means there would be no longer any exchange. And consequently, as I said, the commodity form itself seems to be in question. Therefore, there are many measures to repress reproduction today. Strict laws and their enforcement institutions, copyright law, of course. Complicated technical procedures, such as digital rights management or copy protection systems, for example, for DVDs. Attention techniques that have to be learned, for example, to recognize the authenticity features on a banknote. All these operations are used to suppress the reproducibility potentials of digital technologies, precisely because they are incompatible with the capitalist economy. Scarcity is the central operation of all capitalist economies. Only if something is not available in abundance, it can be a property, it can be a commodity, have a value and therefore a price. Consequently, entities to which this does not yet apply must be made scarce. In the following, I will illustrate this with the example of NFT, non-fungible token, and especially NFT art. If the mentioned 2 points, the practices of the original in art and the repression of digital reproducibility necessary for scarcity in capitalism come together, then the historical conditions are given for a phenomenon that has recently attracted some attention: non-fungible tokens and non-fungible token art. Particularly spectacular was the auction of the NFT artwork Everydays, the first 5,000 days, by Mike Winkelmann, alias Beeple, at Christie's for a fabulous $69 million. In the process, no material object was sold, but rather, in a sense, the right to call a file, the one that the painting represents, an original property. Quote, NFTs, or non-fungible tokens, are unique files that live on a blockchain and are able to verify ownership of a work of digital art. Buyers typically get limited rights to display the digital artwork they represent, but in many ways, they're just buying bragging rights and an asset they may be able to resell later. That is, NFT art is a specific application of blockchain technology designed to enable a radical scarcity of digital data. Admittedly, the hype surrounding NFTs is likely to have been a speculative bubble on the art market in view of the prices that have since fallen again. However, such procedures of singularization of datasets in general, and especially for digital art forms will undoubtedly be important in the future if they want to exist economically under market conditions. As I said, scarcity is not natural, but must be produced. For only in this way can art be property and retain its financial value. Regarding everydays, the first 5,000 days, David Joselit remarks, as you can see, or you cannot see because my video is in the way, its value is structurally dependent upon the exclusive right to control its circulation. This reveals a fundamental and tendentially internally contradictory dynamic in the circulation of images under capitalism. On the one hand, they must be multiplied and circulated ever faster for the purpose of greater visibility and profitability. Already Marx noted, the more that the circulation metamorphoses of capital are only ideal. An example, the closer the circulation time comes to zero, the more capital functions and the greater is its productivity and self-valorization. End of quote. On the other hand, the images must be scarce in order to acquire value as a potential property. This tension pervades all images under network conditions, insofar as they are in some way subject to an economic dispositif. Coming back to everydays, the first 5,000 days. Immediately noticeable is the imposition of 5,000 images, a veritable flood of images that mirrors that of online images, their endless circulation, only varying slightly. If we follow Hartmut Winkler, a crisis of images has long been evident in precisely this quantity that exists in the digital sphere and beyond any imaginable measure. He formulates, quote, an immense surface of increasingly insignificant individual events, which also aptly characterizes everydays, the first 5,000 days. Winkler continues, it is not that computers also deal with images that moderates the difference, but that the images themselves have turned out to be a structure and have thus moved closer to the computer models. If the process of conventionalization ensures that the skeleton of images emerges from beneath the radically concrete surface, it seems only consistent that media history now favors a medium that relies from the outside on abstraction, on structure, and on schemata. Winkler writes this long before the hype about NFTs and aims at a reformulation of media historical models. This recession of the individual image behind a repetitive serial structure mirrors the recession of the individual commodity behind the endless circulation process of capital. It is precisely this historical juncture of the NFT hype that Usman W. Chauhan has recently pointed out, as you can see on the slide. The period in which NFTs have come to attention is one shaped by the economics of the coronavirus pandemic, with absurdly large amount of stimulus money being printed in such a short time to stimulate economies when real material activity has stalled. In the West, at least, there is too much financial capital sloshing around relative to what can be produced and consumed, which is why governments are failing to generate inflation, no matter how much their central banks expand their balance sheets, which, I have to add, has changed as we all know today. Unfortunately, in some countries experiencing late-stage capitalism, particularly the United States, the distribution of that surplus financial capital is extremely unequal which means that an oligarchic economic class has too much nominal wealth relative to its requirements. This means that they can throw financial capital around on whimsical ideas, which in the context of coronavirus restrictions means that virtual assets, whimsical as their existence might be, offer a curious avenue to spend surplus cash for the mere sake of it. One need not agree with this brief economic analysis in detail. In any case, despite its exorbitant price, every day the first 5,000 days may have been a good investment, precisely because it elevated the work to a sensationalized scandal and even retrospectively to the big bang of NFT or crypto art in general. Self-referentially, the price escalated by the scarcity generates exactly that exceptionality that justifies it. In a similar way, already Thierry Deduve sharply criticized the contemporary art of his time. Yes, artists are free. They are free to exchange and exchange whatever, but only there where exchange takes place, in the market. They are also free to do whatever. But the violence of this freedom is not longer that of revolution. It is merely that of economic competition. All the styles, manners, forms, and media are exchangeable and interchangeable. They all compete without contradicting each other, much less as ideologies than as commodities. Painting, which sells best these days if it is figurative, has never been so abstract. It has the abstract quality of money. In any case, the many small figurative and abstract, drawn and rendered images in every days, the first 5,000 days, different in style and medium, interchangeable as if zapping through 5,000 television channels, form an abstract macrostructure, a grid, that approaches not a still visiocentric, to say so, pointillism, but the abstract grid of financial structure. The reduction of the visibility of the individual images in this, as one could say, compressed and regressive archive of artistic work is not a shortcoming, but a reflection of abstract work under conditions of capitalist art markets. The final consequence of this has been described by Stefan Heidenreich in his precise analysis of what he calls freeportism. Quote, "It is safe to say, however, that never before have so many artworks been produced to remain hidden, all enclosed in disenchanted wooden boxes, suspended in a permanent state of exchange, in a place called a free port, because it is free of customs, duties, and taxes of all kinds. Since no one is allowed to see the art, it is also free of audience and spectators, an anti-theatron. It is a place of unseeing." End of quote. Although Heidenreich doesn't write about net art, digital art, or NFTs, but about paintings in the real world, he writes about works in the real world that are deprived of their visuality for economic reasons. The analogy is obvious. The artworks are artificially scarcified in order to preserve and enhance their economic value. The hypercirculation of capital, accelerated and expanded by the digital networks, thus tends to erase the visibility of the image, replacing it with the non-visibility of capital. This brief analysis of NFT art against the background of media history and economics illustrates the tension between circulation and scarcity of digital data and how this is played out in images themselves today, between visibility and non-visibility. NFTs might only have been a hype, but they are symptomatic. Benjamin's reproducibility is only one half of the discussion. The artificially produced non-reproducibility, the other. Capitalism always means acceleration and scarcity, visibility and non-visibility at the same time. Thank you for your attention. I hope you enjoyed it a little bit. And perhaps next time I will be with you in Argentina, and it would be an honor and a pleasure. Thank you.